Hi all, I have another fantastic game to show you from TCEC Season 17 Super Final. This was played in round 95. Stockfish was playing white against Leela. So the opening given was the French defense, e4, e6, d4, d5, e5, b6. This is the end of the book given. Now white's next move prevents c3. This prevents bishop a6. Strategically, with this move, black would like to play bishop a6 and weaken white's light squares, and potentially later squares like f5 and c4 would be nice sometimes for knight outposts. So that's the basic strategic idea. In this game, by the way, I would like to say I like Leela's play a lot, and I'd like you to watch out for this contrast in chess you can have, and I think this game shows it quite vividly, the contrast between simply playing moves and sort of playing for trump cards all the time. It's kind of evident in this game. So here, you know, a positional trump card would be to get rid of the bad bishop and weaken white on the light squares. So that's prevented though tactically here with c3. c5 is played. If bishop a6 here, then the forcing move bishop takes, and then this check is very, very strong, picking up the knight. So for the moment this is being avoided, this strategic exchange. So c5 is played, not bishop a6. We have knight a3, which is a nifty looking knight move, potentially to reinforce the center. We have queen d7, bishop b5, knight c6, knight f3, a6, bishop d3, and now f6. This is very interesting. Black accepts the possibility of e takes because there'll be a semi-open f file, and also is trying to put basically a piece, a pawn on e5, not a piece. White castled here. If e takes, you can see that black has a decent enough position and should be fine here. Okay, so Stockfish castled, f takes, knight takes, and it seems less dangerous that after knight takes we see that a pawn is on e5, not a piece. And also you'll note here there's a certain trump card emerging here. This problem piece bishop could actually be dangerous on the diagonal because this pawn has been mobilized. Potentially there's d4 opening up the bishop on g2. So this would really go for that very, very dangerous bishop trump card. Knight e7, we have queen f3, knight c6. That queen protects e5, but is the queen actually in an ideal spot on g3? What if black doesn't castle kingside here? In fact, the options are open. Bishop b7, knight c2, and black uses the options with castling queenside. So it seems like a very, very interesting position for black here. Rook b1, we see the move b5, gaining space, and these pawns are potentially dangerous. b4, and now white is trying to get hold of this d4 square, perhaps with this move. So we have c4, bishop e2, and here it looks as though actually Stockfish has set a very cunning tactical trap in d4. It doesn't seem like it's possible to carry through d4, but Leela plays it anyway. So potentially it's opening up this bishop, so it's really working on this trump card in the position, and also it's like creating another potential protected pass pawn, the c pawn sometimes. So c takes d4, there's a protected pass pawn there, but the tactical trap kind of virtually set here is on knight takes d4. Sorry, after c takes d4. Let's first have a look at, before we get into that though, knight takes d4, knight takes, c takes. Black should really avoid taking on d4 here. Bishop e7, this should be only a small edge for white. Black has a very nice blockade square d5 here, and the bishop's looking at g2, and it will be quite harmful for white to allow even more pressure on the g file. So black should be absolutely fine here. But if black did dare to take with queen takes d4, the tempo gainers here might spell big problems. So bishop g5 gaining a tempo, and rook bd1 gaining a tempo, and rook takes. It turns out white gets a very strong, position. This tempo, this infiltration, and it becomes a little bit unpleasant for black. If black has to give up material, because it's getting extremely unpleasant now with things like brewing up, like queen e8, bishop f4. This is not the position black wants, so it could end up, for example, like this, with these tempos actually winning material. Long forcing lines. All this is potentially avoidable though, and c takes d4 is played, so still with the option here in this main variation of the game, back to the main variation of the game, of black being able to take on d4 here. But guess what Leela plays in this position, which is basically kind of implying to me, at least, Leela's really into the trump cards of the position, trying to get more and more trump cards going. The moves are just like an interface to that. To Stockfish, the moves are more like an interface to tempo gainers and specific moves in specific positions. But to Leela, it's all about gaining, it seems, big positional trump cards with every move. So the move, what would you play here if you were just trying to get big positional trump cards, like Petrosian, for example, might do? He was a brilliant French defense player as well. So in this position, 500 positional points await you. What would you play? Okay, blockade, knight e7, beautiful blockade. That pawn's going to be blockaded, and we have this trump card, this protected pass pawn, a blockade square on d5, a nice bishop on b7. The trump cards are really accumulating here. If we go into the tempo gaining arena of Stockfish, that battleground, it's not so pleasant. As we've seen in other variations before, starting with bishop g5, if the rook has to move, and this position, for example, it starts to get really quite tricky. There's resources for white like that, and if black doesn't play very precisely, if plays queen b6, I mean, that's bad as well, what I just showed you. But bishop e3, these tempo gainers are a real pain. They interfere with everything positional, basically. Queen h3, forcing something to do with e6, how to protect e6. And it starts to be very tactically unpleasant. So this kind of thing, all very, very forcing stuff, and you can see actually the king safety and the dynamic factors are evident. So here, the king is getting mauled actually with this bishop pair. So Leela has to tread very carefully and bypass that battleground where it's all about tempo gaining and specific moves and king safety, dynamic factors. So knight e7 keeps the game more closed, positional, more about the longer term trump cards of the position rather than the shorter ones, the shorter term ones. Rook d1, we have g5, so offering even a pawn here. Very, very dynamic, creative play, very thematic, especially with this bishop on b7. Looking at g2, we have knight e3. Now, just to show this, if queen takes g5, there's going to be a backfire, and it's going to be unpleasant. Here, queen d5, for example, this just crashes through for black. It's no good when all of these pieces are just sitting around and the king's getting attacked, and it's going to end up losing material. Disastrous for white. So in this line, by the way, if we look at this again, there's another alternative at move 29 in this variation. So the bishop d2 here, if we look at queen d2, the queen can just go back. It's such a pleasant position for black here. And the bishop can come in for looking at things like bishop h4, and winning material basically generally. It's a nightmare. There's too many threats to deal with. It's just hopeless. So knight e3 is played. We have knight d5, so sealing that d5 square, stopping white from doing anything dynamic, keeping a blockade on d4. We have knight takes, bishop takes. We have bishop h5. Now queen c6, this battery putting pressure continually on g2, tying down the white queen. h3, we have bishop e7, rook b2, rook d f8. The queen is actually positioned such it's not just the battery pressure, it's being able to sometimes play c3 at the right point. This protected passed pawn has already got some gravity to it, but can black contribute to that gravitational pull of this potential pawn mass? We have a3, rook f5. Another big trump card is emerging here, pressure on f2 as well as g2 by the doubling of the rooks. White's rooks, by contrast, they're more passive than black's rooks. Rook a2, king b7, rook f1, rook g8, queen g4, rook a8. Okay, some shuffling here, but now the rooks do double nicely. So look at black's pieces, 2 batteries, not just 1, 2. So piling up the pressure on pressure points f2 and g2, protected passed pawn, blockade on d4 pawn, nice blockade square on d5. And there's even a pawn break here, potentially a5 to watch out for, which in fact is played now. And yeah, there's a lot of pressure on the white position, and it's already rather tricky to handle a5. Stockfish gives black yet another trump card, even more potential pawn mobility now. Potentially 2 connected passed pawns would be the dream. Now, why did Stockfish play this? Isn't it releasing, the control over the b4 square? If we look, if bishop e3, then just taking here, and this isn't a brilliant pawn sack idea. Black's just doing fine. There's potential of the passed pawns. If we look at rook b2, then that runs into c3. That's impossible. And then just taking on b4 is technically possible. Taking on f2, taking on d2 is crashing, and in fact the king could be checkmated in some lines. If we look at so there's not too many great alternatives after this a5 move at move 31. If we look at king h2, that just drops f2. If we look at rook cc1, then just taking here, this position is nice for black. That frees up the rook for a moment. The rook can start hitting d4, so not just f2 but d4 is loose here, and the queen can go to b6, and you can see this is looking nasty. So maybe Stockfish didn't really start liking the position after this a5. This looks like a release, a greater liberation of the black pawns here. We have bishop takes a3, so yes, another big trump card is emerging here. The 2 connected passed pawns. It's like white's being totally positionally outplayed, with big strategic trump cards being thrown and accumulated at every move by Leela, and white's just trying to play a more clinical tempo gaining game about tactics, about king safety, about specifics. But black is playing these longer, bigger constructs of positional play, the passed pawns, the batteries, the blockades, the bigger constructs, which you could call the longer term trump cards. Queen g3, okay, that's hitting the bishop goes back. Rook b2, we have king a6, so the king blockades the extra a5 pawn white has here. But look at these 2 connected passed pawns. The king's quite safe here on a6, it seems, and it's doing a nice blockade job. Bishop g4. If bishop b4, then for example this with rook f4, again d4 under fire, and this h6, the queen can't really leave g2. That's horrible. So h6 is a nice nudge move. And what does white do? If queen g3, then rook takes d4, and it just gets nasty again after bishop e4. There's it just starts to be very nasty on the diagonal. If the queen doesn't do anything, then other horrible things start happening, like rook d3 maybe. So yeah, it starts to be very passive. So bishop g4, the rook goes back, bishop h5, and a bit of playfulness there. Okay, the rook b1, rook fb1, rook b8, bishop b4, and we have g4, another pawn sack. Try and put more pressure on the white position. hg, if bishop takes g4, then first bishop takes b4 is accurate, then h5. and there's no backfire. This is just winning material. If h5 immediately, just to explore the pedantics of the situation. So if h5, then bishop takes e7, and this should be okay. It's about even, that position. If the bishop actually went back to b4, though, there's still some trouble here with rook h7. So for example, this, giving up the rook, this is a nice variation to do with king safety. And black ends up crushing it here. Crushing position. But yeah, white doesn't have to play like that. So anyway, hg. So what is going on here with this pawn sack? It blocks in that bishop. So that bishop's kind of stranded over here for a moment. You can see ominously these connected past pawns. Are they building up? We have bishop e4. This bishop's much better than that one for a moment. Rook c1, rook d8. And we have bishop takes e7, rook takes, queen e3. If rook d1 here, then in fact c3 becomes possible. This position, that big passed pawn, is really getting significant. For example, like this. And it's winning. Yeah, look at that bishop being blunted from d1. It's winning for black. The passed pawn's there. So that's so queen e3. We have giving up g2 here. That's taken g5, at least opening up the bishop for d1 control. Bishop d5, f4. So is white at least repairing the g2 issue here? What about the two connected passed pawns? Leela has been traditionally strong in passed pawn management. Rook b7 as though b4 is on the way, and in fact Stockfish doesn't even try and do anything about that. Yeah, it just plays king f2. So tactically, it seems you know there's some other issues going on here. Maybe things like rook c8 and c3 later. So we have king f2 just allowing b4. It's a very, very big move to allow. We have bishop e2, rook c8. So two connected passed pawns here. f5, e takes. Okay, some pressure on c4, that's protected. And f4 here, this gains key time, it seems. I'll try and distract the queen away from the e pawn. Queen e5, though, b3, rook b2, f3, encouraging white to go into nasty pins. There's things like rook f8, that bishop d3 is played. Well, it's more significant than that actually here. Technically, after bishop takes f3, bishop takes, and hitting the queen. And if queen takes, this position, black's passed pawns are more significant than white's by a long shot here. Black can offer, can get this position absolutely crushing. So the gravity of the passed pawns has been increasing here. So bishop d3 was played, a tactical move relying on this pin. We have king a7, a6. The rook drops back. Check, king a8. Queen d7, that's taken. And here, rook c6. And white's getting desperate here and gives up a piece. The two connected passed pawns really are meaningful now. Absolutely meaningful, spelled out. Bishop takes c4 was played. If the bishop just went back to b1, then rook d8, this position, is very, very strong. The bishop is actually really supporting the b3 pawn here nicely, as you can see. So this is just crashing through. Yeah, these big positional trump cards really mean something. The gravitation on them has just been increasing throughout, and this has now culminated in a piece, winning a piece concretely. So here, yeah, a piece down. It's actually a bit desperate now for white. The pawns are also fragmented that white has, so they're not so powerful. They're dropping off like ripe apples, as fragmented pawns tend to do. Black's getting more blockade potential now around. It's only bishop for pawn anyway, so it's not much. So this is all pretty much over now by this point. Carries on for a bit, and it's just a matter of technique really. This extra bishop, the king, getting ready to swap off on d5 and queen the h pawn. So white resigned here. So yeah, a pretty positionally crushing game. It's very rare that Stockfish loses with the white pieces. The positional pawn sack, the instructive philosophical points, the pawn sack, you know, takes the battlefield not for a tempo gaining battlefield, technical one, but a more long-term strategic one, where it's about blockade, it's about passed pawns, it's about batteries, building up the battery pressure, tying the opponent's pieces down, trying to gradually increase the gravity of the passed pawns. So really big strategic trump cards all the time. You can see that Leela's just using moves, the act of moving, as an interface to that longer-term strategic constructs. Stockfish is more at the pedantic level, it seems, in this particular game. I think this opening really reflects, you know, the more strategic opening it is, it more reflects Leela's strategic play more, because that is the constructs, the strategic constructs really match the opening here very, very well. So I think that's why Leela's so good at the French defence, which is an often asked question. It's because the French defence, which was a favourite of Tigran Petrosian, a really positional world champion, and also Mikhail Botvinnik, you know, strategic players have often done well with the French defence. It's out of favour now in the higher echelons of chess, but it remains a solid choice. There are certain grandmasters like Ruzan Jacobian, a French defence expert, who plays it regularly as well, though. So it hasn't gone totally out of fashion, but it's a very, very interesting positional opening if you've got that kind of temperament. Okay, so a fantastic positional game, I felt, and it shows really the marked style difference between the two engines. If you'd like to play me, Kingscrusher.tv, by the way, and register, and I'll be able to invite you for a game shortly after, or bit.ly/chessworld. There's a suave chat forum at Kingscrusher.tv/discord. You might want to come there and make game suggestions, etc. My playlists, bit.ly/Leela chess. There's bit.ly/Stockfish chess, bit.ly/Magnus Carlsen chess. Check those out. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this one. Comments, questions, likes, shares, subscribes, all appreciated. Thanks very much.